back at it again with another banger.
Okay, so today on Louder with Crowder. No, not that. This is quite different. I'm here with Tim Pool now.
Oof, that's a bad one right there.
I'm here with Andrew of Master Signified Bodies, and we're going to be talking about Chapter 8 of Jacques Lacan's Seminar 1, The Wolf, the Wolf. So today, this is Andrew's ballywick, so to speak. He made some videos a while back on IG where he very expertly explained and broke down all of the constituent ideas here in the next two chapters we're going to read. So the scepter of the subject supposed to know will be passed to him, and I'm going to let him dig right in like a wolf, devour this chapter. Wolf,
becoming wolf. We're becoming wolf like Deleuze and sorry, the Thousand Plateaus. So I think a little background of this case is that this isn't to get confused with the Wolf Man of Freud. This is a specific case from an analyst and psychiatrist, I want to say as well, Rosine Lefort, who has the spotlight in this specific lecture that Lacan gives in the seminar. And the whole point of this is kind of like to really, again, elaborate this function of his little diagram or his little experiment of the inverted bouquet, the optical schema, because we saw how little Dick functions in so-called this, like, I would say like a limbo, in which like he had words in the unconscious, but like he didn't have the function of speech to fire off and make those connections in the symbolic. Like he says, like in the last chapter, he's no idiot. He's definitely not an idiot, but he inappropriately uses words at the wrong time for the wrong things. And so like he's like almost in this weird relationship between the imaginary and what we call the real. And you could kind of see this play out with the wolf kid, Robert, in which, in a sense, like he is stuck purely in this intimate reality with the real and traces of the imaginary. And just to kind of give a little feedback, in the Machine of Unconscious episode with Leon Brenner, he says that this is another child who actually had developed autism, or he was like autistic spectrum. So like him, and then of course the little Dick, who were kind of diagnosed as some type of psychosis or delirium, actually had autistic spectrum. So that's probably why there was like a difference in their structure and development, not just from in their life experiences, but in the fact that their the way that their development of what we call the mirror stage, which is typically the case in most neurotics, doesn't really play out in this, I guess you would call, specific order. You see the image of yourself, then you're caught in the spectacle of your own image, and then you identify with it. That becomes your ego formation, and then you're admitted into the symbolic, which is where the superego and the introduction of the ego ideal comes in, which we'll get into that in more detail later on with the two narcissisms. But that's kind of like the whole gist of it, that there isn't this, but yet there's like this regress back to certain elements of libido in which it's trying to formulate this.
So I wanted to ask you, do you think that Lacan uses the case of little Dick to set up the optical schema, and then when he's laying out how the optical schema works, there's this lacuna in which speech goes, because as of yet he hasn't explained what speech is through the optical schema. So now he's asking his colleague to explain her involvement with this case as a way to fill in what was missing from the optical schema, which is the dimension of speech.
Yes, and you'll see it specifically too with not just speech, but the way of language, or like this hooking of a signifier, especially with this kid, because he's known as the wolf child because he only knows the word wolf. And so like this thing acts like a hook and kind of levers him back to certain like, episodes, hallucinations, but at the same time it brings out some type of like safe ground for him, but it also could be very aggressive for him. And when he lashes out, he expresses it by saying wolf, wolf, crying that out loud. I think the main point of too is like, what is it like that he's using it for? Like in the last section, we were talking about, what was it? The Bueller guy who, created that theory of language, the different stages of language.
Right, the call.
The call, the
or
imperative.
The imperative, right.
And then, or like declarative statements, just raw data, the imperatives, and then communication at its finest, like the way you would communicate words. There is an appropriate
Successful communication.
Yes.
Where like an entire situation is sort of encompassed by the speech that you're using.
And in the sense that he can't communicate correctly, wolf still is expressed in, you would say, not only as a reaction, but his behavior and his outbursts act as a way to symbolically try to function or express what he can't give in speech. So with this kid, I think it's important to say that there's somehow some type of like, he's got some doors open into the symbolic, but he's not really in there. And I think also because he doesn't really have an ego identification as well.
What struck me about this case versus the Little Dick case is Little Dick is very docile for the most part.
No affects.
No affects, doesn't interact with anything as if it were living. He almost doesn't even seem to have a notion of what an object is, which is something that he seems to kind of have in common with the wolf child here, but the wolf child is practically feral.
Yeah. The wolf child will grab onto certain objects and kind of fetishize them later on in his, not development, but just like overall interaction with Rosine Lefort.
So, okay, before we get into the facts of the events of the story of the wolf child, we should remind the listeners that we're still within the realm of the transference. So we've explained resistance, but it seemed to me at one point as if transference went with resistance, and that I understood it, but now I realize that there's a lot more to transference. So we are on the road to understanding what transference is, and then there's this concept of transference love.
Yes.
And that transference is love, and that in a sense transference is something. I remember earlier Lacan asks the question, is there such a thing as resistance outside of the analytic session? And I think he basically says no, but transference is something we experience all the time. Transference is communication, essentially. Would you agree with that?
It is the communication so far as there is the plane for where transference takes place. And that was kind of a complicated answer, but that's how you would word it, because when we're playing with these three registers, he wants to make it clear that there is transference in the imaginary, but only insofar as what is being transferred is something of which, like before Lacan, we would say, like in the 14th sense, what's being transferred are these unconscious emotions or affects directed from what would be the past onto the analyst. And what's being transferred is speech. There's not just emotions on their own. These emotions are guided by words. These affects play out through certain speeches, through certain like repetitions of the discourse, of words that are in the linguistic structure of the patient. And yeah, like we're always transferring, but it's not like we're always resisting. I mean, even though, and it's kind of paradoxical, because then it's like, well, you know, he said that the ego is its own resistance. The ego is a symptom, structured like a language. The ego is its resistance, structured like a language, its own phantasmatic producing machine, still structured like language. But all of these you could see are like in a vehicle of speech. And, you know, each, you know, like if we look at like a car, like it's got different components, like these are words that are in velocity, like, and that it would be the speech. But the transference deals with, so far as there is the subject and the other giving them the recognition.
Something else that occurs to me now about this section of the seminar is it's entitled On the Topic of the Imaginary, but Lacan is really laboring to try to circumscribe this dimension of the symbolic, because it seems to me that he came to the limits of describing the imaginary without recourse to the symbolic. And now the symbolic is necessary because the two are commensurate. They exist in tandem in a sense.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that if you didn't have the symbolic and it was just the imaginary, then, you know, that is where there is nothing but aggressivity without structure, without, you know, the understanding of language and symbolic. But like what the symbolic could create an order or a law or a machinic, you know, it could create a culture, which is a machine made by the symbolic that takes on a life of its own. And we are, in a sense, dictated by it, guided by it, molded by it, like Bane. But like that's the main thing of his like critique, because, you know, like the whole spiel that you get about Freud is like, oh yeah, the id is like all, you know, our desires and cravings and our animal instincts. No, it's actually more along the lines, it's like the ego is more like that, without the symbolic, without speech. You know, the libido is actually functioning on, you know, its aim, but you would get that later when we'll talk about that more in the narcissism chapter, because I don't want to kind of foreshadow or really get off on tangent. But we'll see that it's really the key thing, that the symbolic plays a big role for guiding and structuring and situating what he calls the I and the schema, the ego, the observer. And he's like, yeah, we're not this abstract I. We're not like just like this, like, you know, disembodied I that's just like a scientist. But that, and we already said before, the like with two body psychology, you got to account for a third. That was the other critique, because what is being transferred otherwise, like not only in this like aggressivity, but because it's not aggressiveness in the sense like, oh, I'm just trying to destroy you, like physically, I'm going to express this anger out of you on this like animal barbaric instinct. What it is more the fact of like this situation of mastery. But then what is it trying to master then? Only itself, but itself in what lens? The ego seems to always need to end up formulating some type of speech or another, or symbolically try to situate itself, which we will see in here too, in this, in the whole case with Robert, the wolf child.
So we have the case of Robert, as you just mentioned, Rosine Lefort. I wasn't able to find too much information.
There is, I think, a PDF on it, but it was really like nothing that you could have already
in there.
Just I know you underlined, like, you know, we talked about the transference of transverse love, but I think it'd be best to save that for the next chapter, because then he mentioned it, and I could elaborate more on that with understanding of what transference love is.
But just to frame this, transference is what's playing out here in some.
Yeah. So transference slowly begins to happen with the wolf child and Rosine as I guess you could call it a transference, because it gets a little complicated, because as you see, this kid, he was born with a lot of problems, and I think his mother suffered from some type of like hallucinations and delirium, and she had to be like hospitalized herself. But even before then, she abandoned him a lot. She like didn't feed him at times, left him like literally like in his like soiled underpants. Literally had to be reminded. But with that means like the libido is not getting its immediate demands like met, like it's like libido instinct rather than libido drives, the biological instincts, but drives being like the demand for something beyond the biological, which kind of gets a little like complicated. It's like, do we really have raw instincts like evolution bros would say, or is there like something that's really anti-natural or goes against the concept of natural, which would be drives? And obviously that's when we get into the understanding of death drive, but that's not until seminar 2. But for right now, it's like these instincts of hunger being satisfied, obviously like the fact that he has to use the bathroom, so it's like getting his underpants changed, even just the warmth being given to him when he cries, like none of that is being given at all. So he does not have this like symbiotic relationship with the mother, and libido is not tied in with the mother function. Even in like an objects relation theory, there's no like good or bad object, good or bad mother, or partial objects, because it's usually like the breast, the feet, the hand, like these little things.
Complete absence of the symbolic or real mother relation.
Yes.
In this sense. Now, it's a very harrowing tale. I mean, this child, it says here, underwent changes of residence 25 times.
Different caregivers.
Right. Passed from caregiver to caregiver. And as it says here, there's a complete absence of coordinated speech.
Yeah.
Right. Once he is taken in by Lefort, she finds him. He's just this,
pathetic
collection of unprocessed, sort of like undirected drives.
Yeah.
And he has yet to undergo the mirror stage, but his one form of anchorage to the world of the symbolic is this word wolf, right?
Yes.
And
like right here, like this is like, because he's pretty much lived only in different hospitals and institutions, so that's all he knows, like in the sense like he only knows being like operated on, and like whatever caregiver or nurse was there, and because of all his health problems, doesn't have any motor skills or anything, or at least like control like of his body and like the way we would, completely full of agitation. So none of that at all. Like he's not like in a mortal or a civilian in the world. He's literally like just like bouncing from institution to institution.
But what strikes me about this case is all of his repeated attempts to establish his own individual identity, so to speak, as an object in the world. And it's gruesome and frightening. And you have to hand it to Miss Lafort here because she's very patient.
Very patient.
Not easily shocked by bodily productions, but it's fascinating how he uses his poo and pee to, in some sense, try to create something that is a first item of exchange almost, right? In order to, as if instinctively, to convene with a kind of entrance into the symbolic.
I would even say not even that, but ego identification as well, because with that as well, like in the mirror stage, there's this like now this dyad of my ego that I'm infatuated by, and there's a libidinal investment in the primary narcissism, but also in relation to the mother before there's like this admission into the symbolic. What he does as far as like using this poo and urine, whether he just like wants to like do it in the wastebasket or like even to throw it at kids, what he's trying to do is he's caught in kind of like the sadomasochistic stage in which there is no internalization or reification of this image. It's all outside. So in this like attempt to mirror stage, he's really trying to attack himself because of the aggressivity. The aggressivity is so strong. There's no like, again, I don't want to use the term because I don't think Lacan would be considered like a child developmental analyst or psychologist. I think he would definitely refrain from considering his theory of a mirror stage as like some type of like child development or evolution. But we see it as like, it's not only just one point, but it's something that we're always doing. And it seems like he's always trying to do that, but it never really gets farther than just reflecting back on itself in this aggressivity, like never getting reified, but staying in this external spectacle, this lure. But rather than the seduction, it's more of like this aggressive sadomasochism or sadism, because it hasn't been internalized as oneself. It's his self is outside of himself, outside of the body. He hasn't identified it with the body. That's always fragmented, more fragmented than just this full body image that you would see in the mirror, but in like certain partial objects that are just aggressive. And whether it's like in the wastebasket, in Lafort, you see it a little bit different because it's like maybe there is some sense, not of transference, but like I would say like a symbiotic relationship, because she's actually appealing to like the motherly instincts. So now like he's slowly trying to build that identification with her to get his libido instincts met. And in another instances, when like at night when he grabs the citizens and he tries to castrate himself, it's like at one point you see it's like, whoa, he's really trying to initiate some type of like symbolic castration, but like in a literal way, because you could see like the way that the imaginary has this relationship to the real. It's like fantasy is actually confused with reality, especially in like these aspects of because in the optical schema, this concave mirror, whatever it is actually revolving. So like at some point the image and the virtual image and the real object itself get confused for each other. So you could see him stuck in that.
Now, one thing you mentioned with this sadism, if I understood you correctly, is that the sadism precedes the identification. I thought that the kind of aggressivity that happens in the mirror stage is the product of the primal identification with the mirror image, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a slight mirror stage that he's going through, but it never gets really fully initiated. And I said sadism.
It's like arrested development kind of.
Yeah, and I'll say the sadism because it's like maybe it could be sadomasochism, but I've seen like the way he reacts, like, and later you see that he is the wolf. It's not like this wolf is this thing. It's like he actually probably identifies with the wolf, but it's like he hasn't taken this like apperception, retrospection of reflecting back. It's always outside of him. This antagonism that he's hallucinating in these hallucinations that are having him like locked in this like virtual image in the real, if we could say that. And therefore, like, it's the sadism because he wishes to see this thing, you know, be hurt, like in the sense of the Melanie Klein's sadism of like, there's this kind of appropriate sadism, like there's an appropriate narcissism to help us develop. There's this appropriate sadism, because what it says is like, when you're, you know, the child is on the breast, starts biting, really the libido just wants to consume itself, that it will end up consuming that object with it until the mother says, ow, that hurts. There's the sadism that breeds the conditions for the good object, bad object, good mommy, bad mommy type thing.
Because the idea is the sadism is almost refracted back at you, and then you experience the brunt of your own sadism as developing child, in a sense. But in this case, because the object relations haven't been formed normally, the sadism is like, I don't know, zigzagging, or just this
it's just very
kinetic energy that can't be channeled into discrete objects in order to, because what we talked about before, and we keep coming back to, and Lacan comes back to here with Melanie Klein, with inside and outside and object relations, is this idea that it's a, you know, constant process of introjection and then expulsion, and this bringing, like, taking in and spitting out. So
and a good thing to also remember too, because you mentioned that, which was perfect, was the confusion of the inside and outside. What also makes this interesting is because he does have that focal point again of the word the wolf. And in one instance, when he is having his episode, he sees himself in the reflection, you know, one of the windows, I think, he sees a small like reflection of himself, and he screams wolf and actually tries to hit it. He's hitting his own image. There's not this pure identification or lure. It's like this aggressiveness towards it. Like, he hasn't really stopped to comprehend it. He sees it something as like an aggressor, like something that's trying to take mastery over him.
Right, which is, I just caught this here, which is interesting, an auto-destruction.
Yeah.
And he attacks other children, but he attacks them as, in some sense, you know, he sees them as incarnations of himself, in a sense, right?
Yes.
Everything is some kind of terrifying incarnation of himself in a being John Malkovich kind of scenario. just to vulgarize it. I know it's not as dumb as that, but can you talk a little bit about like the milk and the urine and the feces, because and then the sand later? I thought all of these examples here are really fascinating about how he views himself and container and contained too.
Yeah, and this is kind of getting into the point where like now you see like his behavior is not being cured, or like his like hallucination, his aggressive episodes, but what it is being redirected towards fetish objects. And a point of object relations is this point of even like fetishism, or like this identification with these objects. What they're kind of hiding is like this form of like anxiety, of like what Lacan would say, like the nothingness, you know, beyond on the veil of the fantasy. He's going from identifying with his poop and his urine because he's getting these, you know, cues from Rosine Lefort, and then he kind of switches it in towards like he's sublating them in a sense towards different things, like the sand, for instance, the bucket of sand. Rather than trying to piss in this bucket, he just uses the sand that acts as like his urine. With the milk, it seems like this feeding milk, and then or water seems to take maybe the identification or the resemblance and representation of the breast and the feeding of the milk. And it's and it's not that, like, obviously it's not the mother, but he wants to have Rosine Lefort watch him drink the milk or be by her when he's drinking the milk, almost in the way of like, oh, I'm identifying the bottle with her because she's giving me the recognition. He's transferring not something, I would say even symbolic, but like the libido is trying to redirect itself towards this, towards an autoeroticism, to some type of formation of the ego, insofar as like he's realizing that he has this connection to the mother image, the mother, she's taking on probably a symbolic mother, but we shouldn't see it as like the admission into the symbolic plane, rather as like you say an admission towards general mirror stage, or the way we would view the classical mirror stage development.
I think I jumped the gun a little bit earlier by saying, yeah, him trying to admit himself into the symbolic, but a question occurs to me. Maybe
although he could, because of the fact that, like, it gets a little confusing, because it's like, if he has the word wolf, he has some type of like it may be a skeleton key to the admission to symbolic. It's like there's something there, but something's also missing too. It's like you have the word, but you don't have the formation of the ego. You don't have the primary narcissism. You haven't differentiated good mommy, bad mommy, or you haven't even like differentiated yourself from the mother.
I have another question, because you said something that makes me think I might have missed the exact dynamic going on between them. Is Robert taking cues from Lefort as to, obviously I don't think she wants him to be peeing on her, but yeah, is he taking cues from her as to how he should be viewing his urine and his poo?
Yes,
as like symbolic objects? Is she trying to direct him towards that kind of orientation?
It seems like it. She seems like she's slowly trying to do that. And it's like not in a way to where she's like subject to mastery, but in a sense it's like letting the libido kind of guide the process towards some type of mirror stage or mirroring for a transference. And especially like, I think, does she open the door, or he opens the door, and then he gets scared and he cries. Yeah, and this is like one time he doesn't actually say wolf. He cries at the staircase and he says, "Mommy, mommy."
Right. Which, is that not a recognition of the other when he's saying?
I think it's more of like, it seems weird. It may be a recognition, not a recognition of the other, but more of like the identification with, or the investment into an object.
Right. An object is necessarily outside of you. Yeah. And that's what's trying to be established here.
Yeah. And mommy is not like a master signifier, like, it's not like the big other or anything. It's like, well, what is meant by mommy? Like he's looking for those partial objects, like the warmth of the hand, or like, the arms, or the breast. Even like when the baby crawls, like seeing the mother's feet, or trying to grab, trying to reach, look up, the mother's gaze, but not like this like gaze of the big other type thing.
And then there's this part I thought was really fascinating, with the pot breaking into pieces and then the sand in the pot. And she says here, he had to gather up every last bit of sand as if it was a piece of himself.
Exactly, because there's this thing of like, he's identifying with the object, but it's not like he's saying like, this is me, and then like, this is my object. It's like he sees himself. He's trying to find a mirror stage, but it's not good enough. He's not mirrored in that. And he sees himself being destroyed. So like before, where it's like in the recognition of himself in the mirror, he's aggressive at it. It's like now he's hurt by the fact that his image is being destroyed. It's almost like it's a loss of incoherency. This incoherent, he's building this like He's trying to build this apperception of himself, but it's not working in these specific objects.
Right. And then, there are these privileged objects, which are poo and pee.
Yes.
And what she says here is fascinating. I like this. I think this is Lacan's insertion here, his interjection, not poo, it's pee. One of the more brilliant things he said. But poo is what one gives, and its value depends on the milk one has received. Pee is aggressive. So this is it's a very sophisticated form of exchange that he's developed, in lieu of a true developmental orientation towards.
I mean, you can see the way it's like the P is like marking the territory type thing.
Right.
Yeah. But like, it's not like, this like crude, like, oh, like, animals mark their territory, but it's like, what is a territory? Or for us, like, it's property. What is property? It's pretty much like this. It's not a metaphysical or presupposition thing. What it is, it's like part of the what structures the subjectivity. This thing of I, this I-ness, the sense of I-ness.
And then this here, fascinating.
The rights, yes, yes, this is the main thing.
It's so profound, and it's such a really like prismatic view into everything having to do with what we've been talking about here with container and contained and object relations and formation. He says, as if a container only had an existence through its content and also had to overflow so as to contain it in its turn.
Mm-hmm.
Very complicated, but it says a lot about
the uterine existence, pretty much.
The kind of object that we're dealing with is not just the everyday solidity of an item at hand.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is an active object, an active process of object formation. And what's fascinating about these cases is that it's like we're not talking about just a deviation from a norm. What we're talking about what are fascinating about these cases is that they lay bare the fundamental, I don't know if we want to call it mechanism or just sort of like linguistic coordinates or proto-linguistic coordinates at work when we're dealing with the entire process of forming relations to objects. And this is, in a sense, happening all the time through human cognition, I would say. But
that and the relationships we have mirroring, especially these, like you said, coordinates and with language and structure, it has to mirror, even if you want to break language down to the rudimentary signifier and the signified. Well, that's kind of like a mirroring relationship. It's this binary that depends upon each other. I think like with this, like when you try to like see like that so much of subjectivity relies upon this structure, and without it, even to drive this, like what you probably get on later on, like about the lamella, like the disembodied drive, but like this drive without an organ without a body type thing, not to get confused with Deleuze-Guattari, body without organs, but just the fact that like these drives have to structure themselves on a language, just like a cell on its own is nothing. It's less than nothing, actually. So it has no point but to expand to go into meiosis and to create this network distribution. That's what language does. It's not this collective gathering and it's like, oh yeah, language acquires over time. So no, language is a network, but it seems like this not just the symbolic structure of language, but in subjectivity, there's the imaginary, and it's still a part of the real, which is the fissures. There's this, like, I guess, what did you use the term when we're saying like somehow, like, even though he's got the wolf as like a word, as like an anchor, he still can't create a mirror stage because he's like what, set back or something like that. I forgot what term you used. It was really good. It was a really good word. But it seems like pretty much like with just these fragments, he can't create relations. Like there's something that's not allowed for relations to be made. But he's trying. It's like, and it's not him consciously, it's the libido.
So many questions spring to mind here, but the libido. Okay, we're going to talk about the libido more.
Which we get into in the next chapter on narcissism. That's where we really understand libido's nature. We get more into libido throughout the next few chapters, which is pretty interesting.
So put libido on the shelf right now, but let's go back to, you know, the wolf and the progress that he makes. You know, she says she had the impression that he had exercised the wolf. She becomes the wolf for him, right? At a certain point?
At a certain point, yes. And I want to say that is also probably because like he's still trying to identify himself, and then like he's now projecting that out onto her. And that could be because something that she did caused him to react, feel agitated, to feel threatened. But to feel threatened, it's like, well, what is being threatened, right? There's some part of the libidinal investment that is trying to find, again, some type of focal point to create ego identification.
Right.
That you can internalize or have apperception, like internal perception would be like, this is me, this is my body type thing. But it's obviously an image. It's obviously he's identifying with things outside of him. But if he's saying wolf at things that make him feel threatened, he may be trying to identify with external things.
Right. If the threat's coming from outside, then that's a sign that he might be, as you said, starting to identify with something external and form an idea of an external world. And then there's this scene of him. It's incredibly poetic. Him reenacting being a fetus, essentially.
Yes, because he ties a rope around him, his belly button to be precise, which represents the umbilical cord, with a bucket full of water. And pretty much, what lies on the ground. Doesn't he pour the container of water on him? And just lies there, but he also reaches out to Rosine, and I think he has her grab his hand to where it's like she represents the womb. Like, well, the water is like him covered in the, you know, the fluids of the womb, but he needs that feminine touch, for lack of a better term. He needs the mother. She is that symbolic mother to complete that process. And now it seems like that kind of confirmed for him this symbiotic relation of the child mother.
Baptism in water.
It's baptism. And then followed by the baptism in milk, because the breast, the milk, the feeding, the nourishment of the child. It's probably like more bars than like some like Jungian archetypes. Like it's like literally more sophisticated, because this is like some type of like tribal ritual type thing.
Yeah, for sure. And she's not even trying to relate it to that. And yet it lends itself to these general kind of like structures of mythology and kinship, all the Levi-Strauss kind of stuff. It really evokes all of those things. That does make you wonder if these are not collective unconscious, we don't want to say, but they're unconscious sort of symbolic agencies that determine how in small collectives societies form, whether or not they can be broken down in terms of just some kind of eternal constellation that you know, surrounds us. that's up for debate. But
Mm-hmm.
so he starts to experience a symbiosis, which characterizes the primitive mother-child relationship. Some of his symptoms, some
And
of
his IQ raises.
performances, they do, performance isn't the right word, but like, they recur, of course, but it seems like a success story overall.
Yeah, and like you see him kind of act up slightly a little bit, but that was because like he's still attached to her as mother. Like this is like, and I think it'd be too brash to call him psychotic because again of the whole thing of Leon Brenner saying of his like autism, but this relation between, I wouldn't say that the symbolic is foreclosed like psychotics, but there's this relationship to the real and the imaginary like psychoses where she isn't symbolic, and that makes sense. I now thinking about it, like I shouldn't say that she's a symbolic mother. She literally takes on the external reality of the mother, of the pleasure and satisfaction.
Now, do you think Lafort and Lacan would consider him psychotic at this point, or no? They do proffer a diagnosis at some point.
I think it was like some type of delirium, which I don't think it was him. I think it was like Manoni, I think, or Z that gave the diagnosis.
Dr. Lang, there's a
Lang, yeah, I think it was Lang. Because Hippolyte was like, "What's the diagnoses?" Oh, yeah. Lafort, what is the diagnosis? And hallucinatory delirium is what Dr. Lang says. This mysterious Lang person. But I think in this part, like this, when she leaves because of her pregnancy, it's like he's wanting her, he's acting up, and I think her husband, who's I think is also a practitioner, some sort, was checking up on him, and he was kind of resisting him. So it's like, oh, you kind of have some remnants of some like Oedipal, maybe pre-Oedipal, I don't know.
I hope they had a good like custodial crew in this.
Yeah,
because it seems like there's just shit and piss everywhere. So
and water and milk, sand.
Oh my god! Come home, take a nice shower. I think that pretty much covers it for the fact of it. Now, what's really fascinating is, so we have Hippolyte. He jumps in, asks a few questions about the wolf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's like, what does the wolf represent? Like, why was he saying the wolf? And it's probably because, like, in certain wards and institutions, the children would misbehave a lot that were in there. So the nannies would take them, or like the caregivers, the nurses would take them out to the garden courtyard and then have them run around and hide. And she would scare them with a mask and say, "Wolf, wolf," and growl to make them behave. And so this could have been the reason why, like, he probably identified with that due to his condition, or at least was scared by it. That became like something he signifier he clinged on to.
Right, and then he says, you have the wolf, which creates anxiety in him, and then he plays the wolf. So again, it somehow demarcates a separation between inside and outside in a sense, exactly. That one but again, it's like the alteration, he sees himself on both sides of that barrier depending on whether he's feeling anxiety or overcoming the anxiety. Now Lacan breaks in, and as usual, you have no idea where he's going to take it. It's really fascinating. He talks about the mythical, folkloric, religious, primitive planes, secret societies, but he doesn't want to dwell on it too long, lest he become conflated with Jung, which he is. He is really at pains to make sure that his theory is as far afield of Jung's as possible.
Exactly, yeah.
But here's where it's really fascinating, because now we have our first, I believe it's our first meaningful mention, at least, of the superego. an ego ideal, because he mentions here that he remarks how there are many kinds of therapeutic action which conflate the two and posit the analyst as both the ego ideal and the superego, depending different degrees of, but there is a laziness, at least that's kind of endemic to the psychoanalytic societies as he sees them today, that doesn't try to really draw a clear distinction between ego ideal and superego. And he says they're not the same thing. And I double highlighted this one. So, the superego is essentially located within the symbolic plane of speech, in contrast to the ego ideal. And later on in the chapter, Ideal Ego and Ego Ideal, we'll understand better how the ego ideal emerges. But the ego ideal is not a linguistic phenomenon necessarily.
No, it's still on the plane of the imaginary, insofar as one can see themselves outside themselves. But in the superego is always like an imperative, like a vicious, tyrannical signifier, and conflates itself in neuroses. But it's definitely not the ego ideal, but there is this relationship with the superego and the ego ideal, which I think is what kind of bridges, in some cases, the symbolic with the imaginary.
Right.
Yeah, because he says right here,
that makes sense.
Ego is an imperative. It puts the constraint on us, and then the ego ideal is this exalted thing. It's
right.
like,
that's what he says.
Magnificent. Like freaking chads that want to go to the gym and get big because they're trying to freaking go back to their original male masculinity. Back all that good stuff. Make men great again. Like, that's like an overexalted ego ideal, but why?
Right. And then once they've developed some muscle, they're looking better, but then they see, oh, I don't have the V. Yeah. And the superego is that voice that says, where's the V? Why don't you have better definition in your lats? Why don't you? Yeah. Sure. Okay, fine. You've got a 4-pack, but where's your 6-pack?
You need to start taking TRT. Joe Rogan's the ego ideal. He's the super ego. No, actually.
Which one? What would he be? I mean, he's many people's ego ideal, but not as a comedian, I don't think.
He's the ego ideal, and Jordan Peterson's the freaking tyrannical superego.
He's the superego. He is absolutely.
And, it makes sense though, because he is the superego. Because at one point he's tyrannical about. He's like, you men need to stop weeping around, chasing women, these blue-haired feminists. And then at the next point, he's literally bawling in tears, crying, feeling pain and sorrow and remorse or hurt and a victim. I think the conflation of the ego or the superego, it's neurotic. It's both. It could be neurotic as in like condemning, but then shaming itself and feeling victimized and hurt and guilt, creating these barriers of fantasy.
Right. And later, Lacan is going to try to extract his notion of the superego from the wider Freudian idea of something that is just a moral agency, to something that actually commands you, in a sense, to disobey the very law it establishes. And that's what's really fascinating. And he says it's a relation to law. It's a senseless law. Failure to recognize the law. Méconnaissance, of course. Famous,
the misrecognition.
Word misrecognition, but it also has to do with knowledge. So it's almost like a misknowledge, a non-knowledge. Yeah. Right? And what's fascinating is that now we really get into some Kantian stuff, because he said earlier we were talking about imperative, we were talking about Bueller, and those three stages of language and the imperative, and how there's something very primitive
Yes.
about this idea of you must. And whenever I hear the word you must, of course I think of Kant. Of course I think of the categorical imperative and the fact that it's categorical. It's abstracted from the contingent situations of one's life. And ideally, theoretically, you would know how to act in any given situation, despite the extenuating circumstances, despite how you stand to benefit personally. If how you benefit personally happens to coincide with what's right, it's still not purely right because you're doing it for personal gain. But of course, this theoretical situation where you would act purely non-pathologically in the Kantian sense never actually happens. It's an impossible situation, but that's reflected in the very voice here. The very command here is one that is impossible in its
because all these things of you must actually affirm its pathology. It's like anything that happens after just verifies why you need to be pathological. And this like these prohibitions and these commandments. And it's funny you mentioned Kant, obviously because of the imperative, but the Adrian Johnson's Zizek's ontology, he refers to Zizek saying that Zizek believed that that Kant was the perfect Lacanian neurotic, in which he creates all these orders and faculties and conditions for the possibilities of experience, and placing the thinking itself outside of the reach of phenomenon and these faculties of experience. It's like the impossible of knowing, but just know that it's there. That is, in a sense, like the philosophical objet petit a, in this paranoiac knowledge. Like paranoiac, not like as in like a schizophrenic, psychotic, but like in the fact that this is hystericization, even some like paranoiac discourse of like thinking that there's something that we could maybe discover or I won't discover, but I could be paranoid about it because of my faculties. Even the fact of like something like, nobody's really a solipsist in philosophy, but this fact of like solipsism and like my mind, I could maybe be the only thing that I know that exists. These fantasies that actually make you more paranoid and about everything else outside of you, or like even try to affirm this like narcissistic fantasy, which I think solipsism is more along the lines of like this affirmed narcissism trying to philosophize itself, but still like, even though it's like, oh, how do I know anything outside of me exists? What if I'm like in a cog in a machine? What if I'm really like in the simulation? But it's like, then you're paranoid about something outside of the simulation. You still gotta, that is still in a sense real. It's still a transcendental thing in itself, or this, objet a type thing.
Well, it's fascinating you say that, because it's sort of like the objet a of modern philosophy, which begins with Descartes.
Yeah,
has a strong resemblance to his very procedure, which is to question everything to the point where you can come to some kind of irreducible kernel. But yeah, his very approach to it is that of the paranoiac that you're describing, in a sense. So you begin with an almost sort of deviation from a norm, a kind of a sort of a pathology.
Yeah, this knowledge, which is it's paranoiac knowledge, or this like misrecognition, this like certainty about your own illusion.
And you necessarily posit the object of your desire outside of any possible reach, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's like he says the function of language, we touch on its most reduced form, a word, the meaning and significance for which the child is even able to define, but in a sense does preserve him to the point where the intervention required by Lefort does the rest of the work. But it's what's most fundamental in language.
Exactly, yeah.
But there's something else I wanted to say here that, yes, I thought this was a great takeaway from the chapter.
Flowers, yeah.
This here, but right. So, okay, before we talk about this, yeah, the contained flowers and container vase and the interplay of the two that you talked about earlier, of course, is that what's real, what's not real. It's already an illusion once removed, but there's the more real illusion and then getting caught in the alternation between the two. But this is fascinating. Going back to the container, he says to be capable of enduring its emptiness is, in the end, to identify it as a truly human object. That is, an instrument capable of being detached from its function. And now we get to something that anticipates his theory of the signifier, and it goes against everything that so many thinkers and philosophers would imagine, is that to be human is not to understand how things work, what function an object performs necessarily, but to remove it from that context.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think it's like these little things right here where it's like alluding towards what Lacan is going to be working with. It's like he's only giving us little bits by little.
It's so interesting.
He's not giving it to us raw with no chaser. It's always getting chased.
Yeah, it's only gonna get crazier, you know. We're still in the first season here. Relatively tame. He hasn't even said signifier yet. I don't.
No, not really. He'll say it later on.
He says it in, like, we know he has a theory of it because it's in function and field.
Yes, but yeah, he's like still trying to introduce it in like little hints.
So I think that about covers it for.
Because we, like, you're already scrolling through. We already went way ahead of talking about everything that was just put in here.
The next one's pretty dense, so I think that there's a lot to elaborate on. So
the next one is definitely a really good chapter.
So we'll take a 10-minute break, come back. All right, awesome.
It's a good chapter. It's really good. Sorry, let me turn off my AC because I had it on to cool off a little bit because it gets pretty humid in here when the AC's off. I'm not used to this East Coast weather still, and I've already been here a year.
Man, you West Coast folks are
we're just not built to last.
Y'all are spoiled. You don't know snow, you don't know humidity.
No, zero humidity. Just freaking beach, desert weather. But anyway, on narcissism, what did we define it as simping for the self?
Simping for the self. Narcissism, this isn't very popular nowadays. It's a little known, obscure sort of psychological disorder that used to afflict people, but now we're very selfless and don't care about each other. So just
mindfulness.
Yeah, mindfulness solved that. It solved a lot of things for a lot of people, you know.
The self-identification with mindfulness is more narcissistic than anything else.
That's more narcissistic than saying, I want to like own several continents and enslave everyone because I'm the greatest person on earth. It's more narcissistic than that. Like I would say, it's the most narcissistic shit.
I think more like not just mindfulness, because you could just be kind of like calm and collective and being able to be aware of your emotions, but like really kind of detach yourself from the world, or like with the mindfulness in the way that it's like signified in like New Ageism or Western Buddhism, like your personal journey towards enlightenment and the fact that it's like the universe has a plan for you. It's in the stars. It was already embedded when you were born. Like
everybody in the Congo? Well, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what the universe intended there? God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Why do these children all have ballooning stomachs from starving? Well, they just need to focus on their goals. You sit down, you write your short-term goals, you write your long-term goals, both of them being eat something.
Light a candle and manifest your
Yeah, man. Then you'll get food eventually. Anyway, so yeah, this is a tricky chapter.
It is, because we get into like some new territory. Pretty much like, again, we get back to full speech, empty speech, but mainly like on full speech, because full speech is like we were talking about the other day. You have some questions about like what constitutes full speech. We have to think about this in the analytic sense, because this is something that is useful for the analyst. It's not like profound philosophical theory. It's a technique that he was working on, using the phenomenology of speech and the structuralism of language. We saw that empty speech is like this idle chatter, but it's really like this Dasman. It's only so much a Dasman idle chatter for the analysts and the analysts, and so far as like it doesn't lead anywhere. It's just constantly just, again, like it could be this as free association, but it's really, in a sense, there's no transference. It's really just kind of being in one's own bubble of narcissism, just kind of venting, but not realizing that, oh, I'm venting to somebody. It's just that I'm allowed to vent without, repercussion, that I'm just lost in like my own perspective, my own like view of my life or my situation, without kind of any thoughtfulness to it or any like retrospection. It's just like this absorption. And it's not only until like the deformation of it, these slips of the tongue, again, forgetting the names, but like as they continue to happen, as they have meaning and they anchor into the analytic situation, or there's resistance, but even resistance needs transference to happen. So there's not this pure bubble of a narcissism, but rather like this, again, this transference connection, which happens on speech, in the level of speech, as speech is exchanged. Full speech is, again, something that is affirmative. It is the Biaoheng. It's a revelation of truth, because empty speech is this mediation of egos. Still the symbolic, still a language, still speech in the phenomenon, but the Biaoheng, this affirmation without negation, is located in the unconscious, as there's a pathway when full speech takes place from this deformity. And I think that's what he's literally just trying to get us to know. And one thing is, he says like with speech, or like this empty speech type thing, it's like a communique, like a performative stunt. It's something like almost like a contract, press release type thing. He could have said communication, whatever it is in French, but he said communique, which has a different connotation. If full speech has Biaoheng, communique is like something of like a contract, press release type agreement thing, but really it's the thing that's being revealed under the unconscious is it comes from the full speech. But we can't have speech without the transference, at least speech in the analytic session. But we said in the beginning of this episode that transference is always happening outside of the session, but resistance really takes place in the session. Resistance really has meaning in the session, in the transference.
What's interesting?
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'll later.
Well, hold that thought, but I just wanted to say what's interesting about the previous story that was relayed to us was the fact that it really is, despite all the other contingent factors involved, it's the word, the wolf, that we should really take away from that, I think.
Yeah, it was a performance. It's not something that's communicated like as in a relaying of of information, but it's like almost like a stunt that's showing you something.
It's indicative of a certain dimension of speech, which we can miss when we're caught up in the das man of everyday speech, in a sense. And he really wants to isolate it, I think, and designate it the hinge that's going to take us to this point he's making here. But what did you want to say earlier?
I think what I just wanted to kind of add was more along the lines of like the transference love thing, but I think we'll get to that slowly because we're still going into the referencing of speech, but just how it plays in the role of the transference. But I mean, because these like couple pages, he's pretty much just going over again like the full speech type thing. But it's really right here on the next page after he kind of talks about like the stunt and publicity thing of communique. So he really says like, what is transference? Because it seems like, he's mentioned it, but he's like really trying to re-question it. What is transference after all? Which is like in the next page.
Can I just ask you a question about the distinction here between the plane of recognition and the plane of communique? Says that, he talked about transformation, and I think it might be in this seminar where later he's going to talk about how when during a marriage ceremony, when you say I do, that's the kind of speech that transforms you and the other person, right?
Yes.
That would be the plane of recognition then?
I would say, yeah, that's like the whole thing of because there's a reference of how to, I think it's a word called like how to play with words or something. I want to say it was in this one. Which I've mentioned a while back. And it's like the implication of language, like, oh, there's the salt, type of thing at the table, where there's like an implicit communication. It's the same thing with, as you're saying, I do, like the transformation of language and the communication is the fact it's like, I do, you're implying a set of communicative things that's like with the I do, it signifies a lot, that you'll stay loyal, that you'll be bound to the recognition of your wife or husband or whatever, and that you'll follow these strict guidelines that what a marriage consists of. And it's all contained within not just the word I do, but in speaking it in the structure of the ceremony, which, it would be a communique.
Just 1 second, I'm having an issue with my fire alarm thing. Just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In the what I was trying to say, it was the How to Do Things with Words by J.L. Austin, but it's the term performatives, meaning like you actually perform things with words, and that was perfect with the ceremony of the marriage. It's a perfect thing. The salt on the table, which I think we should give credit to Singularity and Sublimity for that.
Yeah,
those examples.
Future guest.
Yeah, we should have him on there. I would, should have him on here. I hope he's watching this.
For sure. So, we're smack dab in the middle of Lacan's deliberately confused way of expressing things. So I'll try not to get too bogged down in like the line by line analysis of it, but just because I'm kind of confused by some of the way he expresses things here.
And I think it's really confusing when the way he's trying to like just like talk about the performance of language and the transference. He makes it overly complicated. But in a sense, it's like there are certain things within full speech. It's not necessarily a deformation like a slip of the tongue for, as what he originally said. And again, this could be because he's such a developmental thinker. He's always trying to go back to things and reiterate, like, yo, I said this. I feel like we do this too in our seminars. I feel like I'm like that. I'm not as I have everything already systematically laid out. I'm like, here it is. Drop the thing on the table. It's
I already said that. I won't repeat myself.
No, I want to go back to it.
Right.
And with here, it's he wants, it's not just speech. It's how it takes place in the transference, that there is these performatives that allow you to see, okay, what's being transferred, because the transference, and what she wants to kind of go back and define, because it's building up, or if there's these performatives in speech, so it's we should really think, what again is the transference, and there's performative in this phenomenon of transference, or transference phenomenon, or even transference love, which we will get to again, how it was brought up in the beginning of the wolf. That's really
is the wolf a performative?
I would say it would be a performative of something of the wolf and what the wolf meant. And
so we have performative, sorry to cut you up, but performative and communique.
Yeah.
That's the dichotomy.
Mm-hmm. And it's still again, we shouldn't see full speech and empty speech as two separate things, but it's a dialectic. They're dependent upon each other. Or there's the dialectic with the ego, so far as the ego is a mediation of speech, or with speech. And the fact is that it's still not something positive. It's always a negative. It's always a negation. And it has no point in this analytic session but to determine its own nothingness, which leads towards the unconscious affirming itself. I think right here what I like to add is something as far as I was just describing it in that dialectic, is something along the lines of what we're talking about, the Verneinung, and the Jean-Paul Sartre's understanding of consciousness, of the being and the nothingness. Because I think I said that in the last video too, of recapturing what was going on in Verneinung. But right here, I think he wants to make known that language as a performative of how people can really perform and affirm the unconscious within little doses of language without realizing, until it all comes tumbling down. It all the blocks fall down like Jenga.
I think when you just mentioned Verneinung there, I feel like I had sort of a light bulb moment. Although I could be getting this wrong, but I think it has something to do ultimately, what he's trying to carve out here is something like a definition of, the negation of the negation as it's at play in all communication. And we have what he said earlier about the idea of an object being detached from its function, right? And how it's the whole process of signification itself is, although we want to often make it conform to the semblance of a communique, it's as if signification itself is more so, in terms of how it emanates from the unconscious, it's predicated on a kind of an absence or a self-referentiality, in the sense that there are these signifying acts, right? There are speech acts. And Zizek talks about this, I think, with the empty gesture, right?
Yes.
Many signifying acts, many communicative acts are performed for their own sakes, he says, paraphrasing, of course. But we do things in speech not always to get a specific, measurable, tangible result where we can glean something from it, but we do things in speech oftentimes for their own sake. So it's like, it's almost as if the test of someone's initiation into the symbolic order is not, do you know what this means? You know what this means? Can you produce results in that kind of capitalist mindset? But rather, can you do something that is, in a sense, can you perform empty gestures, right?
Yeah.
That let me, like, and there is a function to it, but what an empty gesture lets me know is that, oh, okay, there's a kind of, there's a mirroring process here that's happening that lets me know, okay, this person's normal, like this person knows what's going on. This person's not a kook. But then what happens when we're talking about autistic subjects, they rightfully, we might be the crazy ones in the sense that, like, they rightfully don't respond to some of these empty gestures because they don't see the point, right? It's like, why do these things? Why say something that carries no significant weight in the sense of a communique? And they'd be right in a sense. I don't know.
I think like with not just autistics, but like the fact, like with teenagers, and they get in their angsty stage, they kind of see like most of the things. It's like, man, why is it like they're at school and they're like, man, I feel like some of these teachers, just like they have no purpose. You're like, just like the fact that like, everything that they do, this paperwork shit, it's just like meaningless, just pointless. Like all this stuff is just like in a sense, an empty gesture. They're cynical about it, but in a sense, there's some truth in the way they kind of critique like how the school system functions. It's like they see some things are just empty gestures that like really have no meaning, but they're just like are kind of like referential to themselves. That the point that like even like teaching the Pythagorean theorem kind of loses its reference. It's just an empty gesture. It's just, you're supposed to know it, right? But nobody would really know how to apply the Pythagorean theorem in the day unless they're actually like a mathematician, like literally like college level, because I don't even think that most high school teachers could apply the Pythagorean theorem in there every day.
No,
but yeah, but like so like certain stuff like that, like just like these things, and I may be thinking about it like a more Althusserian way, not in a Lacanian sense, but it's like the way that at least institutions uphold certain things as tradition just become empty gestures that like lose their context.
Right. But instead of like the only fallacy of the angsty teen who rightfully perceives something is this notion that there is a like abundance or like an ampleness to speech that can be gotten at these empty gestures.
Exactly. Like he's like, I've got beyond it. Like it's the thing. It's like you could try to get like you could create this meta language that gets beyond these empty gestures. It's like, no, you're duped.
No, yeah, it's all an empty gesture in a sense. And I think that maybe this is the dimension he's trying to cite here. But I don't know. That feels very tangential. I'm not sure because there's so much going on here. I don't want to get too bogged down, but he talks about intellectualist analyses. And tell me if this chimes with you. My interpretation of this is that he was talking about how, and I think a lot of the time he's talking about how metapsychological explanations get conflated. They get, you've got, like peanut butter in my jelly. You've got jelly in my peanut butter kind of situation with metapsychology and just the actual act of analyzing a patient and the way the two get.
Yeah, like they get so like, I was thinking, like more along the lines like that. Like there's just too much of like this trying to conceptualize the patient, not listening. And I think this is what in the discourse versus ego analysis, he kind of claims that Anna Freud was dealing with some type of intellectualist tradition. I didn't really think of it in that sense of like trying to put the theoretical notions into play and trying to find them, but I think it was more along the lines of like having so focused on like this, the patient really insofar as they're trying to synthesize their ego, since this is like ego psychology as well, like this perfect notion of themselves in an intellectual way, whereas like the Melanie Klein was because, and it could be the fact that I think she was a literary writer as well, but before being an analyst, but also the fact that she knows what it's like to be like in a position of hysteria, neuroses, and delusions, that she has this more empathetic approach. But I think that's also why, like, she's not trying to like put concepts into the thing where it like deludes like your notion of the patients, which is probably even an aspect of countertransference, like trying to conceptualize, like you're trying to have mastery discourse over this person, and
there you go, right?
Put them in boxes, put them in categories, which is like, it seems like that's what psychiatry does. It seems like that's what at least the stereotypical notion of psychiatry, or like American psychology and behaviorism. It's like you're talking about your thing, and then like you're referencing stuff like, yeah, I have this feeling like I wake up and I feel like just sad or just like depressed every day. I'm just like not ready for work. Well, why aren't you ready for work? Well, I just like this week has been rough, and just like my boss is like blah 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 blah. It's like, oh, what you're doing is like you're already fortune telling, you're predicting the future, and you're already thinking in black and white, like the most outcome. Like this is the type of discourse, is because there's no lying on the couch. You're literally sitting face to face with the therapist, psychotherapist, perfected CBT, DBT type shit, and they're already trying to tell you, it's like, this is an example of compartmentalization, and you're already compartmentalizing your day as just being, your automatic thoughts are just going to, oh, this is going to suck because I felt this before, or I witnessed before and I felt this way, and so I'm going to fortune tell and predict the future that it's going to be like this because my boss is like this, and I have this automatic perception of him just being this angry person, and I'm just thinking black and white, the worst case possible, black and white thinking. Like all this is just like, in a sense, intellectualizing from the sense of how we can look at it in modern therapy.
It's like
therapist is really just compartmentalizing their own patients.
Right.
Like, oh, you're doing this? Oh, I know what this is. I'm gonna look at my list of CBT symptoms of anxiety and ways of cognitive thinking.
It's nothing your YouTube algorithm couldn't do for you, essentially.
Yeah.
It's just coming from a flesh and blood person.
Yeah, I'd rather have like, oh, you're depressed? All right. Here, I'm going to tell you how I live. So I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I make my bed. I drink black coffee, and then I journal.
No way that person's depressed. Sounds so depressing. My God. Not that waking up early is wrong. No, actually, it is.
No, I can't wake up late. I need to wake up kind of early.
No, depends. Depends on what happened the night before.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's see. So he says something interesting. So he's still talking about transference, symbolic transference, but he says something interesting about repetition of prehistoric situations, unconscious repetition, putting into effect reintegration of history. And he says, insofar as its historical dimension is misrecognizing, he says, you'll note I didn't say unconscious. So this isn't unconscious. It's a misrecognition of the historical dimension that is at work when we're in these kind of
this is what he's trying to say is like, after all, what is transference? And he's mentioning historical things in the transference, especially transference neuroses. What's going to happen, and what ought to happen to make the analyst be able to guide the treatment, is the fact that anything that gets latched on, let's say like to we're Lacanians, Freudians, the names of the father function in the Oedipal complex, that gets taken away, that from the past, from the symbolic imaginary father onto the analyst, which allows the analyst to know what they're working through. And in some cases that this past could get confused with the present is what is known as neurotic transference, if I'm not mistaken. And neurotic transference is when somehow, like, when the resistance gets bad in the transference, is that, oh no, you are literally like, not just like my father, you are my father. And this actually takes place, if I'm not mistaken, again, when there is some type of delirium or hallucination. The deeper you get into this nucleus of oppression or the nucleus of the symptom, and it doesn't mean that like they're psychotic, because just because they're having a hallucination doesn't really mean that they are psychotic. If you watch that movie, Adu Lacan, the Brazilian patient that he has, the
You
Brazilian
mean to
Turk.
watch that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. She has a hallucination in the waiting room of seeing a rat, and it really had to tie into something that had to deal with um, uh, a tie-in with her father, because rat sounds like the first word, like it was a Turkish last name of her father's last name was like Rata something, and the grandfather had it, but then they changed it because they were ashamed of it, because when they moved to like I think Brazil, and then they were ashamed of being Turkish, and so they kind of put that guilt on her of, you should be ashamed of being Turk, and then go move to France where you could learn beautiful French, and you go to Portugal on the other side and you learn better Portuguese than Brazilian Portuguese. So it's like all these things of just like, which are more like cultural colonial type things, but they still have effect on the psyche. But it's like with the whole thing of the hallucination of the rat, it wasn't the fact that she's afraid of rats, more the fact that the word rat kind of had a significance to this being ashamed of her past and her cultural identity, but also because I think her father was called dirty like a rat as well, and the last name had like the first word had a rat in it, but it was like rat and whatever the language was, the Turkish language. But yeah, you could see something like that happen in this, the difference between when the past gets confused for the present, and there's a reaction towards the analyst, that becomes what is called neurotic transference, which is transference neurosis, is what should take place from the evolution of the analytic situation, the analytic treatment. Transference neurosis means that the past is projected onto the analyst. So it's like, whether it's a positive or negative, it's like, oh, this is something my father or my mother would say. I see you as a father figure. There's this like dupe the subject's supposed to know, but it's not like they're confusing the past for the now. It's remnants of the past of the unconscious come onto the analyst so that they can work with it and so they can guide the treatment again. And then I see right here we're getting out to transference.
I don't know if we want to address any of this. I feel like he's just he's got some personal gripes to work out. He talks about Fenichel in not so flattering terms. But I think it's more about this intellectualizing of the entire practice of analysis. Strachey, misinterpretation of the superego, which he doesn't quite agree with. I don't know if there's anything you want to elaborate on here.
Well, I did want to touch on the whole thing of the article of transference love, because that does have something to play too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It does tie into the whole thing of the narcissism as well, which we'll get into. And the transference love, the way it is, and that transference can be love. And I think he elaborates that more in seminar 8, which is literally titled Transference. He gives the whole spiel about the symposium with Socrates and Alcibiades. But the transference love is this aspect that happens in the transference, which is kind of, it's born from the conditions of analysis, that you're allowed to associate, you lie down on the couch, you don't look at the analyst, but then, as soon as, let's say, like, there was no transference to begin with before the sessions ever started, let's say, like, you're just associated on the couch, and then, like, you're just saying all the stuff that you're not used to saying, and then you realize that the analyst is there, and it's mainly because they're not saying anything, not because they said
presence,
something.
right? Presence.
Yeah, presence. But you feel shocked, but yet you're okay with that because you never said something so like intimate, like your fantasies, maybe something sexual, maybe something that you feel shamed upon, something that you were dealing with pathological guilt in the neurotic subject that you feel okay with, and then you start to really wonder about this analyst after each session, because you're not sitting face to face with them. You're supposed to lie away, and they're sitting like on the other side of the room. But then as you start to get used to being with them, you start to wonder about them. Then maybe they, because of the transference, they'll start to kind of pop up in your dreams. And then you really start to kind of fantasize about them. Like, what do they do, you know, on the outside? Like, what do they like? The transference love is kind of like, you know, you start to have these, sometimes you'll have these erotic like thinkings about them, but you know that you don't really consciously believe this, but it's part of the transference process that you start to like wonder about them, their interests. That's part of the transference love. But it's also similar to like when you're in a romantic love relationship, you want to know what this person's into, this person that you're dating. You want to know what they like, even what they like in the bedroom, things like that. Things, because you're used to free associating, that these come up because now that becomes your habit to associate without judgment. But still, the super ego is there to make you feel, whoa, I had this fantasy, kind of withdraw from that. But that's different from like another form of transference, because this is transference love, and then there's like, it's also known as erotic transference, I think. But then there's this other form of transference, transference erotism or something like that, or erotistic transference, where that's where you're actually obsessed with them and you literally are in love with them, which is like
That's
kind of
the
dangerous.
subject of the
Yeah,
Freud.
and it's kind of dangerous for the analyst because sometimes like the patient will stalk them, the patient will try to call their house, literally keep tabs on them, because like telling them like, please, let's just stop the you know, this session, we could fall in love, I promise I'll be healed, these type things, these bargains. That's something like really, like, if they fall in, it just also depends on their condition too.
Freud's paper takes a very Victorian tack on the whole thing, in that like the way he approaches it is you know, exclusively from the point of view of the male analyst with a swooning female analysand, but he brings out some really interesting points and strategies to deal with just that.
And it's the main thing about maintaining and being mindful of countertransference as well.
Right.
But what really makes this the thing of love is why it's associated with love, is because, again, transference is not specifically situated in the analytic session. This is only so far as psychoanalysis made the term transference. But we're always doing this in our love relationships because we seek recognition, this totalized image of ourselves in the eyes of the other, which I think should lead us into understanding what narcissism is, because it has to deal with the recognition of an image.
Really good. Totalized image of ourselves in the other. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's dense. So I think we'll skip ahead of Fenichel. I don't think there's anything that important to say about that. It's always important, but
there's a lot of stuff that you could find, but it's like, you know, we're not trying to read the lecture of the seminar to people. It's like,
we don't want to
understand, so that when they read this, they're like, oh, okay.
So he talks about the empirical totality of the notion of transference, and that all of the registers are alive in the moment of transference, which I think is interesting. And he says earlier, I think this is in the previous chapter, is like, people object to my tripartite distinction between these three registers, but he's like, again and again, emphasizing it's very important that we try our damnedest to distinguish these three, because transference is at work when the three of these are tied together.
Definitely. And he, like, I'm on the side of just like not only reading this in like any other seminar. I'm really like fixated on rereading Seminar 11 specifically because that's just, like most famous one, right? Everybody wants to draw upon that one, if not Seminar 20. But like it seems as if Seminar 11 is just like a recapitulation of Seminar 1, but just like bigger and broader and better, and he's emphasizing the real over the symbolic and showing how the real takes place in relation to the dream, that there's this deadlock between the fantasy and the dream, and then like even where this gateway for the real to take place. And obviously things like the gaze, objet that come in, but like he's going over again things like the transference, things like the symbolic, even bringing the optical schema into play. But it's like, how does the real really function in these notions? It's like, this is really like Seminar 1 2.0, but it's like, all right, I already gave my apology on Freud. I'm about to drop the whole Chronic album on you in Seminar 11.
I like that, the apology on Freud, though. It's kind of the trial and death of Freud.
Yep.
Serge Leclerc the God comes in here.
Yeah.
He has a really great essay in this anthology that I was leafing through.
Yeah, Leclerc's pretty legit.
Yeah.
But although like Deleuze and Guattari really dislike this dude. They don't like Leclerc. Yeah, they don't like Leclerc at all.
Is he a simp?
He's pretty much a Lacanian, and also part of like so they I think they beef against Freud, but at the same time I think there's some like kinship to Freud in definitely difference in repetition in Deleuze. But they think that Lacan is onto something, but it's Lacanians that kind of like,
he's the Lacanian.
Yes,
they're burning him in effigy.
Yeah, that like are dogmatizing psychoanalysis and keeping things in this like the whole mommy daddy me thing, where it's like, I think with the whole later Lacan and even like Seminar 11 with like the whole thing of disembodied drive is like something that's along the lines of what Deleuze and Guattari want to put in a project of body without organs.
Interesting.
And I think
that'll be good because I'm about to read that. It's coming in the mail. I'm gonna start reading Anti-Oedipus soon. So
I love that book. That's a good book.
I'm gonna be picturing to be the target of their criticisms as Leclerc, poor guy.
Yeah.
But all right, so dementia praecox.
That's literally just like the like technical medical term. I don't know if it's still used today, but like it's a technical term for like schizophrenia.
For schizophrenia, right? Yeah. Is that the diagnosis? No, they gave the Wolfchild a different diagnosis, right?
Yeah, he just got like a delirium, hallucinatory delirium. But this is dealing with schizophrenia, right? And so why this is important is because the development of narcissism, right? It has to deal with this libidinal investment into oneself as, a sexual object, meaning one's body. And then like when you look at the mirror stage of Lacan, one identifies with one's body. That becomes the focal point of imaginary identification, which is the ego. When you imagine yourself, even if you reflect upon yourself, like you get lost in a daydream, you're seeing your own body and it's always fragmented. So in a sense, there's some very small parts of narcissism in us, but yet there's also an extreme form of narcissism, which keeps one from really having the umwelt, the outer world, but really seeing the inwell onto the outer world as a part of them. They're literally want to identify with the world as theirs. Or what was it? I'm really just the universe observing itself, bro.
It's just the universe observing itself in the BK drive-through.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where we are. The
But
universe
in the On Narcissism essay, he's really focused on understanding libido, as well as in the 3 essays on sexuality, that there is this object of investment that definitely is a part of the Unwell, but we could see it as not as like objects as they are, but as they appear to us in, we could say, the Kantian sense, in the phenomenal, but not as like these like naive realism. We should see it as, because if you take on Freud, Klein, Lacan, try, it's like it's this fetishism, it's this certain fantasy of this object. Of course, Lacan would come up with object later, but we'll just say it right now. It's like this level of like the sexual object is always what's going to drive libido. And in a certain sense, there's going to be in the 2 Narcissism essay this distinction of libido and ego libido. Obviously, the object is going to be libido's drive for its satisfaction. But yet, when the mirror stage happens, now there's a focus in an economy on this narcissistic function of maintaining the ego image. The big thing that's coming up right here is the fact it's like, well, this is what he was trying to understand, not only in the form of narcissism, but also on the neuroses. But with the mention of dementia praecox, however it's pronounced, which is schizophrenia, this is kind of what seems to be at contradiction with Freud's On Narcissism essay, or prior to on Freud's Narcissism essay, because he actually takes shots on Jung in this essay right here. Because Freud believes that libido is sexual. It is Jung that believes, because of schizophrenics, that they're not focused on objects in the world. They're not focused on something that's purely sexual or objects of satisfaction. That rather, because of psychosis schizophrenic patients, which of course Freud never worked on, Jung did. He believes that this libido is going towards an introversion onto itself to create this transformation. It's trying to work through, not to say that schizophrenics become transformed, but it's trying to work on itself. It seems that it's invested on these things that it doesn't see itself as sexual. And what Lacan would say in this lecture is that, well, like, you know, Jung was like focused on like these like weird ascetics, religious figures that seem to have the kind of same mirroring production like in symptoms of schizophrenics, but it really has no use in the analytic world looking at our patients in the session. So it has no utility. It's a fine speculation. But this whole introjection and this like rejection of the unwell into the imwell, like it really serves nothing when we're trying to understand libido and the function of the actual analytic discourse.
And that's what he's saying here. I thought this was really interesting. He says it has nothing to do with instinctual registers other than the sexual, and nothing to do with self-preservation.
Exactly, because it's not aimed at itself. Like the thing about like the sexuality is always aimed at the object or the lost object in the 3 essays of sexuality, this thing of the lost object, which I think was mentioned in one of the other lectures of this seminar with the Melanie Klein thing, that there was some relation of, oh no, it's not in this one, sorry, I'm confusing this with seminar 4, when he brings up object relations and how Freud had a theory of object relations implicit within the theories of sexuality, this thing of the lost object.
Well, what's interesting is, just to take it to the trivial level here, I think of how people tend to think of sex as the ultimate goal of the libido for the purpose of propagating the species, and yet that's not what libido is. It's sex is obviously a very libidinal thing, but to think of the libido as having a goal in terms of anything pragmatic that nature would want to inscribe into the outcome of the human species is not correct.
Yes, I think that's a great, more down to earth way to explain it. And like, just to add on to that, like the whole dichotomy of psychic libido of Freud, of Jung, and then sexual libido of Freud, this gets kind of squashed in Anti-Oedipus as well, saying that libido is sexual, but it's not focused on purely this subject-object relation. It likes to deterritorialize itself and assemble onto new things, but this aim is still a sexualization of some sort. And then when it creates this new subjectivity and this multiplicity, that they say, what is it? In relation to one another, we are heterosexual. Perception-wise and internally, we are bisexual, this polymorphous perversity. And then in the multiplicity and molecular level, we are transsexual. They just go on this weird tangent.
That's beyond me. I don't think.
Yeah, it's like, bro, how much acid did you take? But they really like to
give me some, because that's if you're able to formulate thoughts like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still a little bit confused by some of this, and I'm confused about what I'm confused about, because it's hard to orient myself. Like I'm bringing to this some of the secondary reading I've done that sort of clears it up, but I can imagine reading this without like any background and just being like, what is he talking about? But I guess he's trying to like take this out of the realm of the more mystical Jungian, yes, astral projection type shit, and also distinguish it from a very kind of dry baseline, no fun, a scientistic,
yes,
materialist view of the world where sex is all about the perpetuation of the species and the prosperity of mankind. And he's saying it's neither of those two. It's neither something mystical and special and sublime, nor is it just this dry mechanical process aimed at birth.
Yes, definitely. And I think like at the end of the day, he's still saying that libido is still sexual, but it's not this like reproduction towards creating the species, but it's not this psychic universal hermetic type thing. There is this lure in the mirror stage again when we see ourselves. There's this seduction is we're drawn to, like in the sense where if we take it into the animal kingdom, the mating, there is this image and lure of the female to the male, the female giving the dance. I think there's this seduction and lure by, you could say that the female praying mantis to the male praying mantis, or the Black Widow and the male spider type thing. But for us, we're the only ones that get seduced by our own image. So therefore, libido invests into that. Because for Freud, libido is life force. It is life energy. It's sexual and it's creative. But it's not like this, like, oh, it's creative up to an extent until like we need to introject and create our self-transformation and create this self. And where with Jung, it's like the unconscious gets realized so that it could transmute and be integrated into the ego. We create this like more individuated ego that's perfect, because that's still ego psychology. What he's saying is that like the mirror, or at least our Lacanian reading of Freud, is that there is this libidinal investment into an object, but this object is not a thing just complete in the Umwelt. It's also in our Inwelt, this object of ourself that's constantly, and you would say it's like Freud was onto something with dialectics, even if he really didn't know it. This whole philosophical, orientation of the split between what constitutes the Inwelt and the Umwelt. It's like this dependency upon it. Even he would look
right. No, sorry, go on. It's something occurred to me.
Yeah, even Lacan will say later that the unconscious is always outside of us. Like,
well, when you're talking about the Inwelt and the Umwelt, though, it made me think of something from, I remember Jacques talking about in Sex and the Failed Absolute.
I need to read that book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a doozy. That is a doozy. I think that's possibly his top 3 best books ever written. But he talks about libido as actually like the link between culture and nature, and that there are no truly exhaustive theories of how culture or nature slips into culture. You can't explain that break. But, for lack of a better explanation, libido fills that gap in, or is that gap, accounts for that gap between nature and culture in a fascinating way. And it kind of lines up with what you're saying, I think.
Well, and I think too, like, just to look at these other theorists like Lyotard with like libidinal economy, or just the fact that like him and D&G, to extent Baudrillard, political economy is libidinal economy, because there's this sexual investment into the production of culture, not just culture as like how like freaking sock simps, sociology simps be like, yeah, there's just like people that interact in the culture is just like, this element of just customs, norms, patterns, and behavior. No, you could see in the Althusserian sense that culture is literally a social formation of what's the base, which is a mode of production. But if you get deeper into these post-structuralists, then it's like there are remnants of other modes of production into other things, but it's like there is this exchange of a certain code or object, which is replaced by a code, a signifier, floating or not, but is invested by libido, and that libidinalizes us more. And that's why it's like, libidinal economy, especially in capitalism, that is perfectly libidinal economy. It's a libidinalist investment into a narcissism, and it materializes our narcissism more, not into this. I mean, if you want to be like sterner about it, we are our own spooks. Our egos are our own spooks, but it's the fact it's like we could have a concrete example of it, and when we freaking compulsively, what's it called? I was talking to my girl about this, but like therapy shopping. It's just shop, it's just make myself feel good. Oh, I see myself wearing these leggings, or this person like, or a guy's just like, yeah, man, I want to buy these like Adidas backpack. I could see myself wearing this. Like, that's the mirror stage, and this like narcissism of seeing yourself in the object, and you have this libidinal investment. You're discharging your freaking, your orgasm into that.
Right. It's almost as if you're like constantly just sort of bounced back into the primacy of the ideal ego, who is only just emerging into these like identificatory strata, but then they're vanishing, and then you're sprung back, and then it's like there's never a decisive sort of crystallization of identification that in other societies might occur. It's like the way capital works is that it never allows you to quiescently arrive at a point where the identifications have fixed in place.
And the one thing too is that there's like with libido, like there's this, what makes it sexual is there's these autoerotic instincts, like this autoerotic like instincts of it is the fact that it'll eventually have no choice but to invest in some sort of narcissism. Look at this case that we just went over. Like, there's no psychic investment in this self, and so far that it's this transformation. No, it's still sexual because it was going back to the breast, it was going back to the womb and regressing just to build itself back up again and invest into this lure. It was even using its own like sadomasochism with fecal matter and pee. Even the fact that it needed to castrate itself, it needed to cut off its own sexual organ even when it was plastic scissors and it was futile, it's the fact that it had that significance. Like, it was aiming at sexual things. It wasn't this like, oh, like, I'm disconnected from the world. I'm trying to literally like Wim Hof myself and literally like Superman ego.
Yeah, because like I mean, if anything, the wolf child would be far more attached to something primal and as of yet pure than anyone who's been exposed to the realities of capitalism and industrialism. So, and yet it's a horrific reality for him. But let's see if there's anything here we want to comment on. He's talking about the distinction Freud makes here between two kinds of libido. I'm not sure whether he agrees that there are or aren't these.
So, and here, this is what I was talking about too. Like, he'll mention later on, but like on the other one. But yeah, these two distinctions between sexual libido, which it would be its autoeroticism, and ego libido, which will then get clarified in the next section when he also wants to talk about drive. You have libido drive, and then you have the drives of the ego, which is going to be what we're used to about like drives, death drive, etc. And I think Lacan will kind of clear that up later on in like his overall career. Spends his whole career on the drive, but Freud sees like this autoeroticism of libido, this sexuality. But then it's when the ego forms that there's this libidinal investment in the ego and its function, its maintenance, constant formation.
He also talks about this concept of the Urbild, which is, it sounds very mysterious and vague, but a unity comparable to the ego, like a proto-ego. Is this what is formed through the sort of Verneinung process?
I looked it up before, and I think it's very much similar to like what this unity of the this overall false mastery in the mirror stage. This overall so what it is because it translates into as archetype, the ego archetype, not like something like the Jungian archetypes, but an archetype is like an archon, a structure, a guiding law that structures something. So it's like this ego image is pretty much what is, in a sense, trying to dictate libido to structure itself around its own image, its own fragmented image. And this image wants to make itself the mastery of the body, but it doesn't know the body. It knows the image of the body. And then obviously we have secondary narcissism, the ego ideal and the whole superego thing. But the Urbid would be this notion of a primal image in the primary narcissism in the beginning works of the mirror stage.
Even before the ideal ego?
Well, you could see the Urbid as the ideal ego being that archetype, not as like a Jungian archetype, because it translates into English as archetype, but like this guiding structure. What allows to structure the ego is this image, this constant like image of satisfaction, because that is the point of ego, or libido ego, or like ego drive, is like the structuration of this primal scene, and it's always going to bounce back between that and then the ego ideal later on. But right now we're focused on the ideal ego,
the primal.
Yes, the primal scene of the seduction, the lure of the mirror stage of this image, which again is, and again, the object of sexual libido, and it's sexual in the sense that because like what I said before, the animals, they get lured by the image for mating. It's like we get lured by our own image, not to mate with ourselves, but it's like this investment of life energy to produce this image of false mastery, this méconnaissance.
So he's still talking about Jung here.
Yeah. Jung's investment into a psychic libido, which is desexualized, which has interest in nothing but this internal world. And that a lot of Jungians will take this up to par because Jungians really believe that there's something in libido that wants to create a individuated self, and I will use the term the self. Even in things like complexes, they don't see some type of sexuality in there for the most part, unless somebody has like a sexual complex or something like that takes place in the bedroom. But even then, it's like that was just kind of like it was deadlocked into that, which really it's not supposed to be, because it's supposed to transform into something greater and bigger. This investment into developing the ego, that everything in the unconscious is not merely just repression, it's something beyond that we're just purely unconscious of. But it allows, once you get those fragments in the therapy session, it creates a healthier, psychically invested ego. And I think it's also interesting too, because right here, right, he's talking about like where you have highlighted like the function of the imaginary, the image, and then like the symbolic, and then like how it's distinguished between psychotic subjects. They get lost in the real, but they have this like weird connection with the imaginary and the real, compared to neurotics, where they still could, they don't lose touch with reality. They still have a touch with reality, but it's always fantasized. They always have these fantasies of people, of objects. They have fetishes that empower these objects or these people. And yet the super ego is inflated, where sometimes it keeps them at bay from really knowing that. But the psychotic schizophrenic really is just kind of a lot of times lost in the real, or can't really draw a distinction between the imaginary and the real. And what's great about Lacan is that he really wants to emphasize right here these structures of symbolic, real, imaginary. In Jung, however, he confuses the two. He confuses the two of imaginary and symbolic. And that's probably because of his whole thing of like imagos or images. He only sees things as that image. He has no notion of linguistics or speech in the way that or Lacan articulates. So he's always trapped in the imaginary.
Right. And is it here? Yeah, where he says that like there's this widespread notion that the deluded subject is dreaming, that he's in the middle of the imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not at all how we should understand the imaginary. The imaginary is what's central to forming any idea of reality, whereas it's the psychotic who has this very threatening proximity to the real.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if we missed anything here. It's I know that this essay or this chapter is based on the essay written by Freud.
Yes, so on narcissism.
It's meant to frame that essay in many senses, right?
Yeah, and the main thing is what is really trying to be pushed by Lacan is, I mean, this whole thing is just about the return to Freud, but this notion of how libido structures the ego. It's not merely a narcissism as narcissism even in psychoanalytic patients where they can't build transference right away because they're just caught in their own seduction. But just the fact that there is a difference between just libido being autoeroticized, which just usually happens with babies. You know, it's just when we're born, we're just in autoeroticism, we're polymorphously perverse. But then there is this investment into the ego formation. But what causes that? And I don't really think Freud had a notion something like the mirror stage, which, you know, developed the ego. And it's like literally Lacan that kind of helps us elaborate on and bridge the understanding of sexual libido to libido invested into the ego, and to get away from this notion of desexualized libido. Not only is libido desexualized for Jung, but it's like this overall universal life force of the world in some pantheistic way. This is actually something that Freud criticizes Jung of, some pantheism.
So why do you think he follows the previous chapter on Robert, the wolf child, with this exactly? Because at first glance, it's not obvious, you know?
It isn't, but then like what I was saying, that it just shows how like if Robert is just lost in some cases of the real and the imaginary, it's but his thing about he's just a bunch of like instincts and drives, right? They're libidinal drives, but then they still try to focus on trying to create this mother so that there could be this relationship of the mother child, and he could develop some type of primary narcissism, especially with the sublimation of his, I think one thing also is the sublimation of his objects of like shit and urine into things like the sand and what was it, the bucket of water and stuff like that.
Can you interlock this chapter with his definition of the libido here?
Well, yeah, because like the definition of libido would just be just life energy, life force. They both would agree on that, or all three would agree at least. I don't know in the later works if Lacan like really has another definition or new niche way of understanding libido, especially with the structuration of language, because he's trying to get away from this biologism. But for Freud and Jung, at least, it is a life force, but it's not a life force that is sexual to Jung. Rather, it is more universal and psychic because it wants to invest into bringing the unconscious to consciousness to create this holistic self. What we see in Robert is this constant regression back to this recreating, in a sense, like a symbolic ritual of trying to be in the womb, to be born again, to create this ego. It's not even Robert. It's literally the drives. It's like, yeah, we call him Robert because that was his name when his birth, but he has no identity. He's just walking libido, walking just impulses without a guide, without object. It's just pure autoeroticism with moments of hallucination, aggressivity every time there's this moment of mirroring with objects, but it's like, and so forth, it's like sadomasochistic.
But the libido wants an ego to invest in.
Yes.
And that's what prompts Robert to ultimately go through this series of almost like poses and performances in order to create something like an ego along with Lafort's help.
Exactly.
So that the libido has a destination.
Yes.
In a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then just to cap it all off, we have the superego and the signifier here, wolf.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
What
we don't know
about
if it really is a super ego, but there seems to be some type of, because they do bring up the super ego at least. Like, does it act as a super ego?
I thought that was the like imperative
Yeah,
articulated, like the imperative was articulated in the word wolf in some sense. That's what I took it as.
that is true because of the fact of the nurses trying to make them behave.
Like the way I took it was that he uses the word wolf to try to manage the sadism that should have been directed and
Yeah.
channeled by the mother, but
Yes.
he had to do it himself. And that, it becomes this very like denuded vision of how the super ego works with all of us, in that we could think of it as like one signifier in some sense, even if it's not.
Yeah. That's
You
true.
must. And that like there's this residue of libidinal energy that is attached to the superego. And as you always point out, it's like the superego is the law and its own destruction in a sense,
Yeah.
and that generates this kind of libidinal excess, keeps it going. Oh,
Sure. Yeah.
and I was on such a roll that the camera.
No, I think that is good. That is perfect. And like, we don't want to get caught up too much in super ego, because we really will get into that in to narcissism. It's like it's literally going to bring more. There's going to be a lot of questions because it's like he could have put. It's almost like he could have put these two lectures into one, on narcissism and to narcissism, but it's like he split it up, so it's like he's leaving more open. But maybe that's just because of Lacan. He's like he wants to leave a lot of questions.
Well, let's look at the question he leaves us off at. It's always good. Well, today's only a curtain raiser, he's saying. So right now, he's only giving us a little appetizer to the main entree here.
Yeah.
Not the most fun chapter to read, but as usual, really interesting.
Yeah.
Two narcissists. Right. Okay. So two narcissisms is the next one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that about does it.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you shouldering most of the burden of explanation there, because there was a lot.
It definitely is, and even with with
everything.
Yeah, with a lot of the stuff, and I think tying this in with the wolf chapter kind of puts it a lot into perspective. But yeah, like the narcissism chapter does have a lot of stuff that he's referencing from not only on narcissism, but then you're bringing in libido, which is something that he gets amplified and explained in the 3 essays on sexuality, which is definitely, it's a small essay, but it's beefy with concepts. It's definitely detailed.
Oh yeah, actually I have a copy of that. I need to take a look at. Is that the next chapter?
The next chapter is just on to narcissism, which I think he will kind of go over that one a little bit. I'm not sure. I'll have to look through it, but we're gonna put drives into perspective. And then when I was talking about the lure, the seduction, we'll get more into that as well. And the play between the ego, the ideal ego, and the ego ideal. And he's gonna bring the inverted bouquet back into
nice.
But yeah, I mean, I really have nothing more to add. I think that was, a good.
Yeah, we're making headway. We're almost, well, we're nearing halfway, I guess, through the seminar. That one was quite the gangbusters chapter there, and yeah, I think that's about it.